Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am your host, Brian Scott. I was recently pondering the Law of One material, and it opened my mind to a greater curiosity and got me to really thinking. In the Law of One material, they tell the story of Carla, who is the main channel for the Law of One material. She worked with Don Elkins and Jim McCarty, and at some point along the way they were attacked by a negative entity. And a lot of those channelings are how they deal with this negative entity. The negative entity would make her sick or trip, or things would happen to her that were attempts to get her to stop channeling, and in some attempts to make her stop living. I got a chance to talk to Jim McCarty about this, and it kind of confirmed what I already had known. There are a number of negative and positive entities. When your third eye is opened, when you are fully conscious and you can see into the other side, you would be shocked. We kind of get a glimpse of this in The Red Lion, the book that I read by Maria Zapes. When the main character partakes of this philosopher's stone, he sees the world as it is, with thousands, if not millions, of entities. Right now, wherever you're listening to this, all around you is a variety of different entities, energies, spirits. They're all around us all the time. We are constantly walking within a sea of different energies, spirits, and manifestations. Most of the time, we're not aware of them. But I do believe that they have a subtle effect on us. They can take or give us energy. They can communicate with us, and oftentimes when we have thoughts, we're actually thinking the thoughts that this entity has given us. Once you've reached a level of spiritual discipline and you cleanse your thoughts, you move away from hearing the thoughts of these entities. But the truth is, this is very important, very hard to understand, and difficult. I don't want to be fearful, and I don't want this episode in any way to create any level of fear from you. But the truth is, in many cases, we are under attack. Never before in the history of our existence has our inhumanity to man been more evident. There is a seething, incomprehensible hatred everywhere, and sometimes I think these entities are a part of it. People who have not done the spiritual work, who are just walking amongst negative entities and their thoughts. Just watch the news. People today commit murders, rapes, atrocities, robberies, acts of terror and hatred more than ever before. Some are consumed by selfishness and greed and care not for human, animal, or any other form of life but themselves. They have plunged the world into a downward spiral of turmoil from which we may never recover. So I wanted to do a teaching based on some initial research about these negative entities. But before I discuss them, understand that you are fully protected. When you are truly within your God self, there's nothing that you need to worry about. With full faith and tuning into the love within you, you can avoid any interaction with these entities. You can also do things like cleanse the environment you're in. Check out my episode on the banishing ritual, where I talk about different ways to banish negative energies in your domicile, in your home, wherever you're at. But we must discuss this further. We are told in the Law of One that places like hospitals are popular for many of these fifth density entities who actually feed on fear. There are mind vampires all around us. We are being bombarded by forces surrounding us. I mean, advertisements, politics, sport, food, drink, sex, those are all forces around us. We respond to these forces without thinking, unconsciously. We behave as machines in thrall. Negative forces produce in us anxiety, fear, hatred, greed, lasciviousness, hysteria, stupidity, dullness, and boredom. And sometimes they are evoking emotions because it is the food that they eat. Emotions in third density have mass, and it can be something that these entities survive upon, that live upon. They feed upon the fear. These are mind vampires. The mind vampires are busily doing their job, and they seem to be winning, at sometimes, a spiritual Armageddon. They gather their strength from self-reinforcing negative energy siphoned off of the violent group soul, and as the human race is being infected, some can only watch and wonder. Why aren't we harnessing those same energies to provide a counterattack of positive vibrations? Because we are asleep, walking through our lives, our minds, screening out 90% of competing images, sounds, smells, tastes, and feelings that are not relevant to our survival. The remaining 10% is a battleground with rival demands clamoring for our attention. Scientists have said that if we did not learn to shut ourselves off from most of the daily cacophony, we would go mad. But by withdrawing into our mental bunkers, to our reality tunnels, we are also denying ourselves powers that are ready, willing, and waiting to change our lives. By withdrawing our heads into our shells like tortoises, we are playing into the hands of those entities which share our dimension, but which are intent on satisfying their own base motives. We make ourselves helpless in the face of forces around us. This does include human entities that are around us as well. But the number one way that you can fight any negative entity, before I go any further and start talking about this stuff, I do not want to create any fear in you, is that you can use love. Love cannot be stopped. It is all powerful. And if you love your enemies and love the negative entities, they will run away because they do not want to have any part of that love. And so love is the most protective shell that you can form. So what are we going to do to help ourselves and perhaps at the same time make the world a better place? First, we must draw on the special gift exclusively bestowed on us by the cosmic mind and tap into that unlimited reservoir of power out there and all around us. To do this, we have to acknowledge and believe in the power of our consciousness and harness our minds to positive energies. Then guard carefully what comes in, making sure we admit only that which is positive, healthful, and good. We can do that with affirmations, and we can do that with choice of the things that we consume. We have clearly established on the Reality Revolution that thought power can change things and people. It can be either positive or negative. Hostile thought pressure and the essence of a curse are one and the same thing. Let's look at some different manifestations of cosmic energy to see how it exhibits its power while continuing to baffle the most eminent of scientific brains. The first thing to recognize is that there are discrete energies which exist alongside our own dimension, which are also part of our resonating soup of vibrations. It is important that we acknowledge these other energies because it will help us see the whole picture and how the pieces of the cosmic jigsaw fit together and affect our lives. Spiritual gurus down the ages have contended that we are surrounded by entities that we cannot see but are real in their own dimensions. Since science maintains energy cannot be destroyed, it can only change form. It seems logical that extreme emotions like hate, fear, love, etc. send out their own vibrations, which, like a charge of electricity, find a haven with other like energies. So in our daily lives, we feed these energies and entities who can then return to help us or harm us. Our world seems to be the natural habitat of negative energies, which defy any known system of reference. Their logic dominates the material world of politics and commerce, in which man's inhumanity to man is a familiar experience, where tyranny prospers and evil empires flourish. Lurking out of the visible spectrum are populations of these unseen beings who take the form of whatever the mind desires. They are tuning in to the myriad energies that abound in the universe, including those we humans have created, and they feed on them to sustain their forms. They are active and intelligent and are able to act physically on people in the same way as people act physically on each other. There are a lot of low spirits abounding in the universes next door, awaiting opportunities to partake secondhand of the old lusts and thrills of earthly life. Some are activated by malice, others merely mischievous, but they draw their energies from their hosts, or whatever is available in the invisible realm, according to the law of one, and many other materials, including Dion Fortune, which is a good source to learn more about this. Low moral ideals, low vibrations attract these low spirits, while high ideals, high vibrations do the opposite. What are the symptoms of psychic attacks and dark energies? There are many different symptoms that can indicate negative and dark psychic energies, spirits, or entities. The following is a list that identifies a few major pointers, but these symptoms, of course, can indicate other types of health problems. They can also indicate ascension symptoms, so it's important to investigate all possibilities. Perhaps you have suddenly or acting out of character, or major changes in behavior for no reason, a loss of memory, major changes in clarity of thinking or analytical ability, sudden ongoing fatigue for no apparent reason, a drained feeling, icy cold feeling on all parts of your body, hearing someone's voice regularly, hearing voices generally, recurrent or frequent nightmares, strange or recurrent accidents, feeling someone is watching you, a discomfort or fear in a specific room or area in your home or office, a drastic loss of self-confidence that does not make sense, a sudden loss of energy, sudden illness that eludes diagnosis, sudden illness that can't be explained, feeling someone touch you or bump into you when nobody's present, or sensing a presence, sensing a large pair of eyes watching you or following you, sudden or irrational difficulties with finances or relationships, sudden depression, visions or hallucinations, irrational fear, anger, or sorrow, negative, obsessive thought, desire, or fetish that won't go away. The view that we are constantly being influenced by invisible intelligent entities is strongly supported by a Frenchman who gained a great following in the mid to late 1800s. He rejoiced in the name of Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivière, but became better known and is still revered by some today as Allan Kardec. He is considered the father of Spiritism, and he had a profound impact on the spiritualist movement. Rivière was a French educator and philosopher born in Lyons on the 3rd of October 1804. He spoke several languages, and his impressive intellectual background allowed him to teach courses in comparative physiology, astronomy, chemistry, and physics in a prestigious scientific school in Paris. For one of his research papers, he was inducted into the Royal Academy of Arras. He was very intelligent, organized, and taught free courses for the underprivileged. In 1854, at the age of 50, Rivière heard of the mysterious paranormal phenomenon table turning that had taken America and Europe by storm. Despite his skepticism, he was convinced by close friends to attend an experimental meeting where he was able to witness such occurrences firsthand. His intellectual curiosity and scientific instincts told him there had to be a rational explanation for these phenomena. Consequently, he began soon afterward to conduct investigations of his own. Using the same logical rigor that he had applied to his work in education and science, Rivière set out to understand the phenomena. He submitted questions to different channels, mediums, in different countries. The answers were compared, analyzed, and organized for inclusion in the Spirits book, which was first published in 1857. A book that I might read. It's a little bit older and maybe hard to follow, but might be interesting for the channel. To keep his new area of research apart from his writings on education, Rivière, on the advice of instructors, adopted the name Allan Kardec, which he was told had been his name in previous incarnations. In addition to the publication of various books, he founded the Spiritist Society of Paris. In his classic Le Livre des Espirits, the Spirits book, he expounded a new theory of human life and destiny. Its contents is based on trance communications received through Mille Selina Becquet, a professional hypnotist. The book was a blockbusting hit, being published in more than 25 editions in many countries around the world. Among the avalanche of information from the other side is a dissertation on the influence the discarnate spirits have on living beings. Interestingly, it chimes in with the view that thoughts are put into our heads from which we make our choices. One actual question and answer session covered this very point. Question: Do spirits influence our thoughts and our actions? Answer: their influence upon them is greater than you suppose, for it is very often they who direct both. After hundreds of these sessions, Kardec produced a useful summary of spirit communications. He said spirits exert an incessant action upon the moral world, and even upon the physical world. They act both upon matter and upon thought, and constitute one of the powers of nature, the efficient cause of many classes of phenomenon hitherto unexplained or misinterpreted, and of which only the spiritist theory can give a rational explanation. Spirits are incessantly in relation with man. The good spirits try to lead us into the right road, sustain us under the trials of life, and aid us to bear them with courage and resignation. The bad ones tempt us to evil. It is a pleasure for them to see us fall and to make us like themselves. Many of us know that we have had guides and have talked to me about their guide leading the way. In many cases, it's simply a spirit that has good intentions for you. Spirits are attracted by their empathy with the moral quality of the parties by whom they are evoked. Spirits of superior elevation take pleasure in meetings of a serious character, animated by the love of goodness and the sincere desire of instruction and improvement. Their presence repels the spirits of inferior degree, who find, on the contrary, free access and freedom of action among persons of frivolous disposition, or brought together by mere curiosity and wherever evil instincts are to be met with. So far from obtaining from spirits under such circumstances either good advice or useful information, nothing is to be expected from them but trifling lies, ill-natured tricks, or humbugging. Kardec goes on: it is easy to distinguish between good and bad spirits. The language of spirits of superior elevation is constantly dignified, noble, characteristic by the highest morality, free from every trace of earthly passion. Their counsels breathe the purest wisdom and always have our improvements and the good of mankind for their aim. The communications of spirits of lower degree, on the contrary, are full of discrepancies, and their language is often commonplace and even coarse. If they sometimes say things that are good and true, they more often make false and absurd statements prompted by ignorance or malice. They play upon the credulity of those who interrogate them, amusing themselves by flattering their vanity and fooling them with false hopes. The higher spirit thoughts teach us that selfishness, pride, sensuality are passions which bring us back towards the animal nature by attaching us to matter. That he who, in this lower life, detaches himself from matter through contempt of worldly trifles and through love of the neighbor, brings himself back towards the spiritual nature. That we should all make ourselves useful according to the means which God has placed in our hands for our trial. That the strong and the powerful owe aid and protection to the weak, and that he who misuses strength and power to oppress his fellow creature violates the law of God. They teach us that in the spirit world nothing can be hidden, and that the hypocrite there will be unmasked and all his wickedness unveiled, that the presence unavoidable and perpetual of those whom we have wronged in the earthly life is one of punishments that await us in the spirit world, and that the lower or higher state of spirits gives rise in that other life to sufferings or to enjoyments unknown to us upon the earth. We can take from this that like attracts like. So the vibration that you're within will attract spirits of a similar vibration. And so if you're in a low negative vibration, you start to attract negative spirits that are of that vibration. The spirits had a view remarkably similar to Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, which we have on my episode on morphic resonance. Question: whence comes it that the same idea, that of a discovery for instance, so often suggests itself at the same time to several persons, although they may be at a distance from one another? Answer: when you say that an idea is in the air, you employ a figure of speech that is much nearer than the truth that you suppose. Everyone helps unconsciously to propagate it. If Kardec's communications are right, we human beings can plug into either those powers that are positive and use them to fight off evil influences and control our own destinies, or let negative energies have their way with us. Noted U.S. psychologist Dr. Edith Fior believed that depression, phobias, addictions, and many other disorders among her patients were caused not by mental illness, but by spirits who after death remained in the physical world as displaced persons inhabiting the bodies and minds of those still living. Their host, Dr. Fiore's patients, were unwittingly taking on whatever ailment these cuckoos in the nest had brought with them, including many physical illnesses. This spirit possession was resistant to orthodox treatment, but responded almost miraculously to a benign form of exorcism called spirit release. Dr. Fiore was so intrigued by her experiences that she wrote a book about them called The Unquiet Dead. Another book written 60 years earlier, which has become a classic among those dealing with spirit possession, is 30 Years Among the Dead by Carl Wickland. Dr. Wickland was a member of the Chicago Medical Society, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the chief psychiatrist at the National Psychopathic Institute of Chicago. He specialized in cases of schizophrenia, paranoia, depression, addiction, manic depression, criminal behavior, and phobias. After moving to Los Angeles in 1918, he founded the National Psychological Institute of Los Angeles with his wife Anna Wickland, who was a trance medium. Wickland treated many patients suffering from mental illness of all kinds, and after many years' experience, came to the conclusion that a number of patients he treated had negative attachments. By that he meant that spiritual entities had attached themselves to unwitting mortals and were influencing them, often in the worst kind of way, leading them to alcoholism, madness, and occasional murder. Wickland stated at the time, "Spirit obsession is a fact, a perversion of a natural law, and is amply demonstrable." He said that to him it had been proven hundreds of times when he had transferred temporarily the supposed insanity or aberrations from the victim to a psychic sensitive, his wife, who had been trained for the purpose. Through conversations with the entity via his wife, Wickland would ascertain the cause of the psychosis. Having come to the spirit obsession conclusion, Wickland and his wife set up a rescue circle, with Mrs. Wickland acting as the medium, and they set about communicating with lost souls who had passed away and were unaware of their post-physical death condition, and often in denial due to dogmatic religious or equally dogmatic atheistic beliefs. In the book's introduction, the author writes, "The change called death, the word is a misnomer universally regarded with gloomy fear, occurs so naturally and simply that the greater number after passing out of the physical are not aware that the transition has been made, and having no knowledge of a spiritual life, they are totally unconscious of having passed into another state of being. Deprived of their physical sense organs, they are shut out from the physical light, and lacking a mental perception of the higher purpose of existence, these individuals are spiritually blind and find themselves in a twilight condition, the outer darkness mentioned in the Bible, and linger in the realm known as the Earth sphere." The book documents a number of cases of both anonymous and well-known communicators such as Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophy movement, and Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science. A number of subjects are discussed, including crime, suicide, materialism, selfishness, and narcotics. Coming more or less up to date is the case of award-winning journalist Hazel Courtney. When she popped into Harrods on April 8, 1998 to buy some Easter eggs, something happened which changed her life. As she made her way through the turnstile to the bread hall, it stuck fast. It wouldn't go forward. It wouldn't go back. As Hazel was deciding her next move, well, let her take up the story in her own words. "I felt a searing bolt of something coursing through my body. I can only describe it as energy. The pain in my chest was appalling. I could hear a voice, not my own, but inside my head, shouting, 'See a doctor now.' That voice, which possibly saved her life, was that of Diana, Princess of Wales, who by that time had been dead for 7 months. Suddenly the turnstile moved and Hazel stumbled towards the exit and found a telephone to call her doctor, who after tests found no heart problems but diagnosed a severe panic attack. Later that night, while lying in bed pondering on the events of the day, the voice returned. It kept repeating, 'I have died and come back.' Hazel, a perfectly normal and balanced, busy wife and mother, had never experienced anything psychic or paranormal. This episode was totally alien to her down-to-earth approach to life. She wrote a book about her experience, Divine Intervention. There is a more extreme version of attachment where the human psyche is taken over by evil or satanic forces. In the Middle Ages, many illnesses, both physical and mental, were said to be due to invading entities. Christian theology then deemed the concept of demonic possession heretical, so anyone displaying unusual behavior or a strange personality was automatically suspected of being possessed by the devil. Possession by a demonic entity later became regarded as superstition, but is it? There are plenty of cases today which mirror medieval examples of being demonically possessed, when the victim appears to suffer from complete behavior takeover by a demonic entity. In fact, the entity may dominate the victim to such an extent that the person it inhabits becomes whatever has taken him over. Obviously, there's some great horror movies, like The Exorcist, that you can watch, that are based somewhat on some true stories, and I could go into those. Going back in time, an extreme example of demonic possession was the Devils of Loudun case, in which, in the 17th century, an entire convent of French Ursuline nuns began to blaspheme, spit, and writhe on the ground as if possessed. Those who tried to exorcise the demons became victims themselves. One died insane, another expired frothing at the mouth and blaspheming, and another went mad years later, writhing on the ground, barking and hissing. A friar kneeling in prayer nearby was infected, and he too began writhing and hissing. This is a real story. This really happened. You can look it up, the Devils of Loudun. There's a whole discussion of it. One of the original investigators, Jesuit Father Jean-Joseph Serene, also succumbed and was horrified that when he tried to make the sign of the cross, something would push his hand aside and he would be compelled to bite himself. He wrote later, "An alien spirit is united to mine without depriving me of consciousness or inner freedom, and yet constituting a second me as though I had two souls." The Catholic Church still defines true signs of possession as displaying superhuman strength, often accompanied by fits and convulsions, changes in personality, having knowledge of the future or other secret information, and being able to understand and converse in languages not previously known to the victim. Arthur Girdham, a psychiatrist working for UK's National Health Service, once stated, "People who insist that possession is an old superstition have never seen a case, or if they have been so blinkered by prejudice that they have temporarily lost the capacity to assess symptoms." He details examples of possession in which his patients say, "Something which is not me gets inside me and makes me do these things." He rejects the modern psychiatric alternative of multiple personality disorder, claiming this is just possession by one or more spirit entities by another name. He considers psychic influence or spirit possession to be the cause of many kinds of illness, mental and physical, and other such conditions such as sleepwalking and addictions. One of the most extraordinary manifestations of dissociate identity disorder is the ability of many personalities to manifest in one physical body. And it isn't just the voices and personalities that change. In case studies, physical differences have been recorded, like blue eyes changing to green when one personality swaps to another. Even more astounding is that while one personality will have cancer, another is cancer-free. I mentioned this briefly in my book, where I quote Frederick Dodson's example of quantum jumping being related to states, and we can see that with multiple personality disorder in the way it manifests. In her book Fractals of God, Kathy Forty talks of a client she calls Valerie, who was host to 100 personalities. Some were male, some female. There was a wild child, some spoke different languages, some were left-handed, some right, some needed glasses, others had perfect eyesight, some had allergies, some not. One was diagnosed as having cancer of the cervix, while another was cancer-free. Another explanation for this weird phenomenon might be humans are not only vulnerable to being possessed by one spirit, but also perhaps by many. Or maybe one spirit can be fractured into many parts. The notion that something of a person's being can be transferred to another is supported by a curiosity arising from some organ transplants. Some recipients notice character traits appearing in themselves that they never had before. For instance, a lifelong vegetarian will acquire a desire for a juicy steak, or a lover of Pulp Fiction will develop a keen appetite for the classics. The phenomenon is called cellular memory syndrome. Paul Pearsall, a psychonumerologist, author of The Heart's Code, proposes that the cells of living tissue have the ability to remember. He interviewed 150 recipients of heart and other organ transplants. One amazing story he recounts is that of an 8-year-old girl who received the heart of a girl aged 10 who had been murdered. After the transplant, the recipient had horrifying nightmares of a man murdering her. Dreams were so dramatic that psychiatric help was sought. The girl's images were so specific that the psychiatrist informed the police. He said using the description from the little girl, they found the murderer. The time, weapon, place, the clothes he wore, what the little girl he'd killed had said to him, everything the transplant recipient reported was accurate. The connection between spirit possession and multiple personality disorder was brought back into public and professional awareness by psychiatrist Ralph Ellison. A chapter in one of his books is entitled Possession in the Spirit World. In it, he describes the effects of spirit interference and the process of releasing the discarnates. Dr. Allison says bluntly that many of his multiple personality patients have exhibited symptoms of possession. He described the encounters with aspects of their personalities which were not true alter egos. He found it difficult to dismiss these bizarre occurrences as delusion. With no logical explanation, he has come to believe in the possibility of spirit possession. He defines 5 levels or types of possession. 1. Simple obsessive compulsive neurosis. 2. Thought forms and created beings. 3. An aspect or fragment of the mind of a living person. 4. The earthbound spirit who once lived as a human being. Or 5. Full demonic possession. Dr. Allison states that he has corresponded with many professionals who have come to similar conclusions about the origin and purpose of alter ego personalities. Some people believe they can become possessed by toying with supernatural using devices like the Ouija board or planchettes. I go along with this theory. It's the equivalent of throwing open your front door and yelling, "Anyone out there welcome to come in and take what you want." But not always. I believe that if you have the light and you're complete within yourself, that negative entities will avoid you when you have focused on love and followed your spiritual path in the proper way. Another thing to talk about is poltergeist. And of course, when I say that word, the wonderful movie comes to mind. In the strange phenomena associated with poltergeist, for instance, we have an extreme example of unexplained energy seemingly out of the control of the human who produced it. The word poltergeist is the German for noisy ghost. In hundreds of authenticated cases from the 11th to 21st century, impossible things happen which no one has been able to replicate in scientifically controlled conditions. Somehow invisible energies start fires, move furniture, hurl stones, ride on walls, smash crockery, produce knockings, and even produce rainstorms inside a house. Usually the phenomenon is said to be connected with disturbed children, often at the time of puberty, the theory being that somehow the emotional turmoil is externalizing itself without the knowledge of its source. One of the most spectacular examples of this noisy ghost activity became known as the Enfield poltergeist. Manifestation lasted from August of 77 to September of 1978. During this time, a mother and her 4 children were living in a council house in Enfield, London, experienced the spectrum of poltergeist phenomenon. Over 1,500 separate incidents were recorded. Things started mildly with just a few unexplained sounds and then progressed to alleged possession and other more disturbing occurrences. It seemed as if an intelligence was at work behind the phenomena because it consistently thwarted attempts by investigators to gather meaningful evidence. In one instance, a toy brick was said to have materialized out of thin air, flew across the room, and hit the photographer on the head. But the cameraman was not quick enough to capture any images of the assault. Many items caught fire of their own accord, and metal objects bent out of shape. The worst manifestation was the apparent possession of a 12-year-old Janet, from whom emitted a deep, gruff voice. Janet was also reported to have been constantly levitated out of bed at night by an unseen force, effectively trapping her on the ceiling on occasions. You can see where the inspiration for the Poltergeist movie came from. Then there is elementals, generally known as nature spirits, but this is a way of rationalizing a raw energy that seems to have an intelligence of its own. Another example of negative emotions manifesting themselves in some physical way. Envy or hatred is produced subconsciously, and this is projected outwards and then returns to its creator to dwell in his mind, forming negative habits and possessions. Then there are demons. Demons are negative energies with a personality that integrates with those of their victims. Who knows what they are? Perhaps they're fallen angels, perhaps they're just people of a negative polarity that have died and come back. They are invisible beings with wicked intelligence wandering on our plane, seeking living bodies in which they can express themselves. These spirits are personalities and have characteristics that make up an intelligent being. They walk, hear, speak, see, obey, seek, think, know, and dwell in the body to accomplish their purposes. They have no other means of influencing our world other than through other living beings. In many cases, what you're seeing or experiencing is thought forms. In some cultures, it's accepted without question. The thought can create an entity which seems to have a mind of its own. There are hundreds of examples, but one that illustrates the point well is chronicled by Alexandra David Neal, one of those extraordinary women of the late 19th and 20th century who journeyed alone to live with remote tribes or cultures. It was in Tibet where she studied the mystical subject of tulpa creation. A tulpa, according to the tradition of Tibetan doctrines, is an entity created by an act of imagination, rather like the fictional characters of a novelist, except the tulpas are not written down but appear as three-dimensional figures. David Neal became so interested in the concept that she decided to create one. It is worth quoting verbatim here from her book, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, University Books, 1965. However interested we may feel in the other strange accomplishments with which Tibetan adepts of the secret lore are credited, the creation of thought forms seems by far the most puzzling. Phantoms, as Tibetans describe them, and those that I have seen do not resemble the apparitions which are said to occur during spiritualistic seances. As I have said, some apparitions are created on purpose either by a lengthy process, or in the case of proficient adepts, instantaneously or almost instantaneously. In other cases, apparently the author of the phenomenon generates it unconsciously and is not even in the least aware of the apparition being seen by others. She goes on, however, the practice is considered as fraught with danger for everyone who has not reached a high mental and spiritual degree of enlightenment and is not fully aware of the nature of the psychic forces at work in the process. Once the tulpa is endowed with enough vitality to be capable of playing the part of a real being, it tends to be free and free itself from its maker's control. This, say Tibetan occultists, happens nearly mechanically, just as the child, when his body is completed and able to live apart, leaves its mother's womb. Sometimes the phantom becomes a rebellious son, and one hears of uncanny struggles that have taken place between magicians and their creatures, the former being severely hurt or even killed by the latter. Tibetan magicians also relate cases in which the tulpa is sent to fulfill a mission but does not come back and pursues its peregrinations as a half-conscious, dangerously mischievous puppet. The same thing, it is said, may happen when the maker of the tulpa dies before having dissolved it. Yet as a rule, the phantom either disappears suddenly at the death of the magician or gradually vanishes, like a body that perishes for want of food. On the other hand, some tulpas are expressly intended to survive their creator and are specially formed for that purpose. Must we credit these strange accounts of rebellious materializations as phantoms, which have become real beings, or must we reject them all as mere fantastic tales and wild products of imagination? Perhaps the latter course is the wisest. I affirm nothing, I only relate what I have heard from people whom in other circumstances I had found trustworthy, but they may have deluded themselves in all sincerity. Nevertheless, allowing for a great deal of exaggeration and sensational addition, I would hardly deny the possibility of visualizing and animating a tulpa. Besides having had few opportunities of seeing thought forms, my habitual incredulity led me to make experiments for myself, and my efforts were attended with some success. David Neal then gives an account of her own attempt to create a tulpa. In order to avoid being influenced by the forms of the Lamaist deities which I saw daily around me in paintings and images, I chose for my experiment a most insignificant character, a monk, short and fat, of an innocent and jolly type. I shut myself in Sams and proceeded to perform the prescribed concentration of thought and other rites. After a few months, the phantom monk was formed. His form grew gradually, fixed and lifelike looking. He became a kind of guest, living in my apartment. I then broke my seclusion and started for a tour with my servants and tents. The monk included himself in the party. Though I lived in the open, riding on horseback for miles each day, the illusion persisted. I saw the fat tulpa now and then. It was not necessary for me to think of him to make him appear. The phantom appeared and performed various actions of the kind that are natural to travelers that I had not commanded. For instance, he walked, stopped, and looked around him. The illusion was mostly visual, but sometimes I felt as if a robe was lightly rubbing against me, and once a hand seemed to touch my shoulder. The features which I had imagined when building my phantom gradually underwent a change. The fat, chubby-cheeked fellow grew leaner. His face assumed a vaguely mocking, sly, malignant look. He became more troublesome and bold and brief. He escaped my control. I ought to have let the phenomenon follow its course. Once a herdsman who brought me a present of butter saw the tulpa in my tent and took it for a living llama, but the presence of that unwanted companion began to prove trying to my nerves. It turned into a day nightmare. Moreover, I was beginning to plan my journey to Lhasa and needed a quiet brain devoid of other preoccupations, so I decided to dissolve the phantom. I succeeded, but only after 6 months of hard struggle. My mind creature was tenacious of life. There is nothing strange in the fact that I may have created my own hallucination. The interesting point is that in these cases of materialization, others see the thought forms that have been created. David Neal's story indicates the ability of our thoughts to take on a more permanent form, leaving the control of the creator and assuming a life and intelligence of their own, and then put up quite a fight to maintain their existence. Another reason surely for us to think only kind, positive thoughts. Negative energies in general can appear as a negative thoughts, negative actions, negative speech or conversations, negative emotions giving rise to undesirable effects such as illnesses. Negative energies can linger in the atmosphere and can even, some say, carry over from previous lives, having lain dormant for many years. Emotions like fear and hatred, guilt, anger, jealousy, anxiety, misery, and depression have a powerful negative impact on the world around us. So we should counter the effect by consciously conjuring up positive thoughts and emotions. You'd be surprised what a difference it can make to your daily life. I could certainly talk about this forever because I am fascinated by it. But at most, I would say not to be afraid, because that will feed into those negative energies, but to constantly bless the areas that you're in, to produce light, to think positively with faith, and bring in the God source, the God power into your domain and where you're at. Evoke your Merkaba, do the banishing ritual, cleanse your area in a way that resonates with you, and become aware that there are entities around you. And we can call upon these positive entities to help us. As Quo says, we are always available for you in meditation. So I call upon Quo and Ra and Christ and the highest entities that I can think of. And the thing that's interesting is they don't coexist. If you have these higher entities with you, the negative entities don't want to hang out with them. So they're going to go away and find someone else. They find beings of light and love around you. They have no interest in interacting with you. It's that simple, but it's a real thing. And I would love to hear your stories and comments. Please share them about stories of negative entities that you've had in your life. When people read the comments, they may be struck by the actual validity of this. And if you have ways of eliminating negative entities in your life that have worked, share them as well. I will be reading the comments. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.